The Void, Series 1, Episode 1. The Naled, Chapter 1. Triskele. Ecumenopolis planet, a single city dominating the entire surface and one of the most densely populated worlds across the whole of human space. It was home to one of the 6 remaining human empires, 5 corporations and 1 theocracy. It wasn't the only populated area of the system. 5 O'Neill cylinders occupied a similar orbit to the planet, part of a slowly assembling Dyson swarm designed to maximize the energy of the star. Each cylinder contained millions of humans, living permanently on the inside perimeter of the habitats. The planet itself had a population exceeding 100 billion and, despite its appearance from above, was littered with slums that the majority were crammed into. Hard to imagine that with so much city space, housing wasn't more plentiful. The Triskele Corporation required so much territory for its industrial concerns, and vast farms took up yet more space to feed the people. Even then, they struggled to meet the demand. From orbit, it looked like a shining beacon of capitalist success and a reminder of man's mastery over nature. An alien world conquered, molded for human life, and exploited. 2 orbital cities remained tethered to the planet, attached by great elevators to the equator. Named Sparta and Mycenae, they represented the military and commerce aspects of the corporation. Only Sparta was severely damaged and venting atmosphere. People were being sucked into space to die of extreme cold and suffocation. A Panther-class battleship drifted slowly towards Sparta, seemingly on a direct collision course, its hull shattered and fragments of the ship spiraling away in all directions. Other, smaller shipwrecks littered the vicinity, the aftermath of a deadly battle that was winding down. A large fleet moved slowly towards Sparta, an Aegis-class battleship unleashing a volley on the Panther hull, the resulting detonation shifting its momentum and directing it to one side of the orbital shipyard. A Vindicator-class cruiser fled the dying stages of combat heading towards the planet, hoping to escape by heading into the atmosphere, where the larger ships could not follow. Jinking erratically, it raced towards the outer limits of the planetary shroud. It could not evade the fleet's fire for long. A well-aimed hit took out the engines of the ship, and it lost all control. The race now turned into a freefall, a rapid descent that could only end in fire. They started to burn intensely now. Oxygen could fuel the blaze, and the pressure wave buffeting the ship was raising the temperature. From the ground, Carl Schafer looked up as his people around him pointed upwards. The burning remnants of the ship shrieked across the sky, trailing black smoke behind them. There was a sudden explosion, and the ship was vaporized, mercifully destroyed before it could land on the city itself. To Carl and those around him, the explosion was an omen, a portent of the end of things. Corpses littered the streets, many of them wearing the uniform of the Triskele military, but there was plenty of civilian corpses as well, executed where they stood. The majority of civilian bodies bore gunshot wounds and other concussive injuries, whereas the uniformed carcasses had been torn apart with bladed weapons and blunt instruments. There were gunshot wounds as well, but most had bore the anger and fury of the assembled crowd. Compared to the recent cacophony and chaos, it was now relatively sedate, though the streets outside the citadel were heaving with hundreds of thousands of people. Fires raged out of control, and gunfire could still be heard in the distance. "Carl!" He recognized the voice and craned his neck, trying to locate the source. "Danik," he responded. A young man barely 10 years older than Carl emerged from the throng, the crowd parting for him. They knew who he was and afforded him some respect. Danik Larson had been an agitator and a key instigator of the revolution, a fiery orator that inspired people to rise up against the tyranny. "Thank you're okay, kid," Danik gasped, hugging Carl. Carl didn't like the subricant, especially from one not much older than himself. "I'm glad you made it. You get your brother and sister to safety?" "Yeah, they're safe," Carl responded. "As safe as they can be at the moment." Good. Hopefully it's all over now." "Did they get him?" "Last I heard, he was holed up in his bunker down there." "He can't think he can avoid this, can he?" "He's just delaying the inevitable. He's got nowhere to run now." "Would have thought you would be with Cale." "Was heading that way when I noticed you. Dumb luck, really," Danik stated. And that awful jacket you insist on wearing does stand out." "Hey," Carl protested. "It's not that bad." Carl was outraged, but he looked up to Danik. During the whole conflict, he'd acted as somewhat of a mentor to him. Carl admired his way with words and his passion for justice, but he also admired the fact that he did not play up to his status people had assigned to him. He was a dissident and a troublemaker, but he was a humble one. "You want to come?" Danik never got to finish the sentence. The crowd erupted with a seething fury as someone emerged from the massive Gothic entrance to the citadel. It was Carl Singh, shepherding out a bedraggled and terrified Villa Triskele. The hatred expressed by the crowd was terrifying, a rage built up over generations of oppression and state murder. Villa had dominated his empire with malicious cruelty, regarding the public as little more than his property and treating them with abandon. Hard to imagine that pathetic individual is the man that caused us to live in fear for over 1,000 years. Danik was right. There was little of that tyrannical bluster that they'd all grown up watching on the streams. He'd been so formidable, so possessed with an egotistical zealotry that it bordered on the maniacal. Now, he was a shrunken figure, living with the knowledge that his future was very short indeed. Everyone knew what was going to happen. For what he had done to so many people, there was no court. Justice would not be held in chambers, judged by learned men and women, but would be swift and terrible. The hollering slowly died down as Carl tried to make himself heard. "Villa Triskele, you stand defeated in front of the people you oppressed for over a millennium," Carl bellowed. "Your army has been defeated. Your apparatus of state control has been dismantled. Your secret police have been arrested. Your reign is at an end." There was a cheer at this sentiment, but it was an angry cheer, not joyous. "Millions have died as a result of your brutality, and the people have lived in fear and squalor, but we have had enough. There will be no trial, for there is nothing to establish. Everybody in the Empire knows you are guilty of atrocity. All that remains is to punish you." "What right have you to judge me?" Villa finally spoke, recovering a little of that fiery anger he once brandished so freely. "We all have the right," Carl spoke. "Every man, woman, and child that has suffered by your edict has the right." With that, two men grabbed and bound wire around Triskele's feet and then hauled him upside down from a lamppost, Villa smacking his head on the hard ground as they inverted him. "Put me down, you—" Villa raged. Carl unsheathed a large hunting knife and showed it to the dictator, whose eyes widened in terror. Something was exchanged between the two men that couldn't be heard by the crowd, but Carl would later find out from Danik. "This punishment is insufficient for your crimes. You deserve much more," Carl was reported to have said. "None of this will bring back my wife, but at least I had the satisfaction of ensuring no one else has to endure what she did." After the quiet admission, Carl plunged the knife into Villa's lower stomach and dragged it down. Triskele screeched in agony, his scream becoming a dry rasp. Trickling down the steps that led to the entrance. During this, the crowd remained remarkably silent, their anger overcoming any squeamishness. Some people looked away, but there was an overwhelming feeling that this was a necessity. It was an act of violent revenge, perpetuated, not by one man, but by a legion. As Villa Triskele gurgled his last, there was a feeling of relief that swept over the crowd. The torment was finally over. It was not enjoyed. It was not adulated. No one saw it as anything less than murder, but it was one they were all complicit in. "Grim," Danik stated. "He deserved it," Carl stated flatly. Carl had lost his parents to Triskele, whisked away by the secret police when he was a child, and it was his motivation to join the resistance. This was now the culmination of all their efforts, and yet Carl felt somehow cheated. It's society purging itself of a great evil. It's a terrible thing we have done here today, but it has been a necessary one, Danik eulogized. I just hope we can move on and rebuild something more egalitarian. Like what? First of all, I need to see Kale. But when I'm done, I think I'm going to need a drink, Danik stated. You're going to come with me, and I'm going to tell you about a little thing I dug up in the history books called democracy.